We came across the Atlantic with a promise in our hearts and Bibles in our hands. We sought to build a city that would reflect the light of God, but we landed on the edge of a darkness we could not fathom. In 1692, the Massachusetts wilderness was not a resource to be harvested. It was a physical fortress of the enemy. To our fathers, the forest was the devil's church, a place where the sunlight never touched the soil, and where the wild things spoke in tongues of malice. Every tree was a silent observer of our sins. Every howl of a wolf at midnight was a soldier of the invisible world, testing the perimeter of our souls. We lived in a state of absolute, unyielding siege. We thought our theology was our armor, but we were beginning to realize that the wall between us and the pit was paper thin. This is the unsealed record of the year the wall finally broke. The breach didn't happen on the battlefield. It happened in the kitchen. In the winter of 1692, the home of Reverend Samuel Parris became the epicenter of an American nightmare. A slave woman named Tituba began to tell stories of ancient gods and secret powders. Then the girls began to change. Betty and Abigail weren't just ill, they were being rewritten by an unseen hand. They crawled under furniture, they twisted their limbs into impossible knots, and they shrieked at the sight of the Bible. Dr. Griggs looked into their eyes and saw no fever, only the reflection of a war we had forgotten to fight. He whispered the word bewitchment, and with that single word he set fire to the colony. The invisible world had entered our homes, and it was hungry. As the accusations spread, the theology of war moved from the pulpit to the skin. We began the physical examinations. We took our neighbors, women we had prayed with for decades, into cold, windowless rooms. We searched every inch of their bodies for the witch's mark. We were looking for a physical anchor for a spiritual crime. Every mole, every skin tag, every forgotten scar from a childhood fall was viewed as a teat where a demon had suckled. We used needles to prick the skin, looking for spots that would not bleed. We had turned the human body into a map of the devil's territory. We were no longer neighbors, we were examiners, looking for the puncture wounds of an invisible army. The intimacy of our community was being dissected by the blade of suspicion. Then came the judges, men of iron and law, who believed that the devil was too clever for the common courts. To save the colony, they committed a theological and legal treason. They allowed spectral evidence. They ruled that a victim's soul could leave their body and witness the specter of their attacker. This was the ultimate hack of the American legal system. It meant that a shadow was enough to hang a man. If a girl screamed in court and pointed to the empty air, the judges saw a demon. We had legalized a hallucination. We thought we were winning the war by bringing the invisible enemy into the light of the court. But we didn't realize that by allowing ghosts to testify, we had given the devil a seat at the judge's bench. We had turned the law into a weapon of the invisible world. I sit here in the silence of the archives, and I smell the old paper and the cold stone. These names, Rebecca Nurse, Giles Corey, and John Proctor, are being erased by the humidity of time and the convenience of those who wish to forget. History is not a series of dates, it is a debt we owe to the truth. Theology of War is more than a documentary studio. It is a digital rescue mission. Every contribution on Ko-Fi funds the massive rendering power needed to reconstruct these silver grain excavations of the soul. We are the last line of defense for a history that is being silenced. Become a guardian of history. Join our mission on Ko-Fi. Help us save the sacred stories before the woods reclaim them forever. Your support is the only light we have left in this dark archive. The hack reached its terrible conclusion on a barren slope we now call Proctor's Ledge. They weren't the monsters the girls described in their fits. They were farmers who loved their land and mothers who loved their children, but they refused to lie. They refused to confess to a crime against God just to save their necks from the rope. We watched as they were carried up the hill. We heard Giles Corey, an 80-year-old man, crushed under heavy stones, whisper only 2 words: more weight. We realized too late that you can hang a person, but you cannot cross-examine a spirit. We had burned our own village to find a single spark of evil, and in the process, we had become the very demons we were hunting. The wind on Gallows Hill still carries the echo of those final, unanswered prayers. When the fever finally broke in the spring of 1693, the silence was louder than the screams had ever been. The judges felt a weight that would never leave their consciences. They buried the court logs in the deepest basements of Boston. They burned the personal letters of the accusers, trying to scrub the blood from the history books. For over 100 years, the names of the 19 who were hanged and the 1 who was pressed were whispered only in shame. America tried to seal this archive to save its pride, but the theology of fear remains written in the floorboards of our oldest houses. A ghost doesn't leave just because you stop believing in it. The debt of Salem is a debt that the American soul has never fully reconciled. We are still living in the shadow of those woods. The devil doesn't need an army to conquer a nation. He only needs a law that allows him to be seen. We look back at 1692 and call it madness, but we still write laws that target the invisible. We still hunt shadows to feel safe in the dark. We still sacrifice our neighbors to the gods of our own fear. Subscribe to unseal the next archive. The past is not dead. It is a ghost waiting for a witness. I have told you what I saw in the woods of Salem. Now the burden of that memory belongs to you. The theology of war never ends. It just waits for the next candle to flicker out. Are you ready to see the next truth?